I'm filming slightly precariously or like in a different setup because there's stuff happening in my room, but I also thought I would try to record myself crocheting this like very scrappy bag that I'm making to hold my yarn in and it's made out of like scrap yarn. So I'm making that. So I thought I would try to film myself crocheting and also me talking about the books I read in March. I'm also like I know that I've said this in like every video, but I'm quite unwell at the moment and like I am probably not gonna be at my best in describing the books I read and stuff, but I will do my best. And I think it's nice to try and do like a wrap up a month for me because it gives me like some kind of like a loose schedule of like, at least I know that I'll have like one video per month, which is nice because I really like doing this. I just find it hard, both in terms of just generally having the energy and then also like talking to a camera is quite a lot of work for me. And with this like 2 filming situation that I'm attempting to do, it means you can also get to see my like incredible outfit with like 8 different patterns going on. I read 13 books I think in March. Well, I guess like 12, and then the majority of one which I finished on the 1st of April, which I am going to talk about here because I want to. So I began the month by reading the 4th in the A Murder Most Unladylike series by Robin Stevens, which was called Jolly Foul Play. And I think there was like a brief dip in terms of my enjoyment level, but generally like I give all of the books like 4 stars because I really like the series and I think it's a great series. And I think overall I would give the series more like 5 stars because it's just really enjoyable. And like I think at the moment like reading series and then like reading like kid series slash like basically just like not adult books with like loads of violence in is what is like giving me some joy. And so yeah, that's really nice. And so this one was about what happens when like this girl who is the head girl dies, and she's been like keeping secrets on everybody and the secrets start to get released. There's some queerness in it which I really enjoy. I do also just think that like Hazel and Daisy are queer for each other. I think definitely Daisy is queer though, but yeah. But we'll see. I'm just enjoying keeping reading the series, and I listened to this one on audiobook, but then also this month I also listened to another one. I mean, I also read another in the series. The next book I read was Long Live the Posthorn by Vigdis Hjorth, who is a Norwegian author, and it was translated by Charlotte Barsland, who I believe also translated Will and Testament, which I also read. And this was a buddy read with Shan at Per Storytime and also Jess at Jess's Reading Ruminations, is that right? I'll leave Jess's Instagram linked down below. But yeah, and it was a really enjoyable buddy read. The book itself was interesting. I liked some of the stuff about unions and letters. It's about this woman whose name I can't remember anymore, who's like part of a PR firm, and she gets hired by the postal workers union or like postal office to help campaign around like postal office legislation or like postal worker legislation, and it's just kind of about that. So it's kind of like quite like, I don't know, technical and kind of like political and minute and like committee type stuff going on, but then there's also like a wider conversation about communication and letters and yeah, like kind of like being able to speak to people and speaking out of love and like what is important in life, and like letters as in words too. Yeah, so there were some things that I enjoyed, and there was like some comments around like immigrants and I don't know, like homeless people and things like that that kept happening, which I didn't really like. But at other times I did find the narrator quite relatable as like this messy, mentally ill woman who's like trying to figure out what is her point in life, and also like trying to help this union and kind of trying to go against like bureaucratic speech and like business kind of stuff which is just so empty and meaningless. So yeah, like a mixed bag, and definitely like a very different book to Will and Testament and doing very different things. But ultimately like I did enjoy it. But yeah, I think like I wouldn't particularly recommend it. If you love like Post, then you should definitely read this, like Post and stamps, and I do love unions, so that was nice. So the next one I read was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge, which has been out for a while and like has been on lots of kind of lists, and I listened to the audiobook through the library because I found out this whole other library service that they have for audiobooks, which like, I had no idea about. So that's exciting. And it's a non-fiction book, and it's about race. It's focused specifically on Britain, which I think is quite useful in terms of discussions around race and racism and anti-blackness and police brutality, because I think on the internet it can often get like really American centered, and then like people lose the specificity diversity of like British context when police violence and brutality happens. Overall I think it was good, and it covers quite a lot of ground, and it kind of also goes back through the history, and like there were definitely some stuff that I didn't know about. I definitely think it's a good book to read if you're looking for some more books about race and racism in the UK specifically. The next book I read was The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey, which has like a gorgeous cover. I spoke a bit about this in a video that I did on Amanda's channel, Butch Poetics, because we're reading the Republic of Consciousness shortlist together, except for I'm not going to read one of the books on it, I think. But yeah, we talked about this because I had read it and they were just reading it. It's really brilliant, I think. It's a mermaid story and it talks about race and gender, and then it also talks about disability. It's also a love story. One of the main characters is called Achaia, and she's this young woman who was cursed by jealous wives and was then forced to become a mermaid. Achaia gets caught, and it's kind of like about what unfolds then and how her mermaidness sticks to her and also lets her go. Like, what I didn't expect this book to be about was disability, and it is, and obviously the mermaid is like a figure that's like quite a useful person to explore disability and ability through, but I feel like that's not particularly regularly kind of like worked through mermaid stories, and they focus more on like the gender side of it, although the mermaid is obviously also like a massively like racialized figure as well, which I thought was like really brilliantly explored in this. But yeah, so there's like some disabled stuff in there which I really enjoyed because it's also part of this like embodiment, this kind of like otherworldly but also kind of mundane presence in yourself and body, and also in terms of speech. And yeah, there's like some ASL sign languaging which goes on, which I really enjoyed to like learn and hear about. I really enjoyed that and I would definitely recommend it. I wasn't surprised that it was shortlisted for the prize because it's been everywhere for good reason. The next thing I read, I listened to the audiobook of that, but I also read some parts of The Mermaid of Black Conch, but yeah. And that's sort of the same thing with Cain by Jean Toomer, which I read next. And this is a Harlem Renaissance text. It's supposed to have like started it, but it also had like a very small readership, so it's sort of questionable how much the book had on like the wider culture. But anyway, this is from the 1920s. It's a kind of hybrid novel with lots of different sections and kind of short stories and lyrics and songs in. It's very rhythmic and melodic. Is that the same word? I don't know. But I listened to a reading of it that has just gone on Spotify. Spotify? Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. That's on Spotify. So if you would like to listen to that, then yeah, you could. I think I probably would recommend it because at least for some parts of it, like I felt like it was good to hear it read aloud, because it sort of felt like a lot of the bits of it were shaped by like sort of folk songs and things that were spoken out loud. I didn't really enjoy it, and I think there is like a lot of violence, including like racist violence and violence against women and like sexual violence, and obviously it's like all of those things at once, you know, like racist, gendered, sexist, sexual violence, which is not very nice to read about. And yeah, I think I also did definitely struggle with like understanding parts of it, but yeah, I am glad I finally read it because I feel like it's an important part of like black modernism and just like the story of modernism in general, which I'm interested in. So yeah. The next book is a reread that I did, which was of The Wee Free Man by Terry Pratchett, and it's the first book in the Tiffany Aching series, and it was like I said, a reread. I haven't reread the first book in the series since I first read it, unlike the rest of the books, except from the fifth one, which I've also only read once, but that's because I read it first last year, whereas like all of the others I've read at least twice, if not some of them more times than that. But it was interesting to come back to it, and also what was even, I guess, more interesting is that like I definitely felt like I kind of built it up in my head as like my least favourite one, but I definitely enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the fifth one, and rereading it and kind of having the rest of the story as well, I think helped me enjoy it even more. Yeah, I just love this series. I think it's just such a wonderful one about witchcraft and trying hard and caring about people and gender and magic. The first one follows Tiffany Aching when I think she's like 9 or something, and she has to kind of go and rescue her brother from the fairy queen. It kind of hits a lot of like fairy tale spots, but it also manages to complicate them in sometimes like sweet ways. So the next book I read was, I'm gonna pick it up, The Hearing Trumpet by Leonora Carrington, which is a weird book. Like I said many times I talked about it. I guess I just find it quite hard to quantify the book itself as a book, and then also my experience and response to the book. It follows a 92-year-old, I think she's 92, called Marion Leatherby, and she begins the story and she's quite content with her life. She has a friend called Carmela, and she then gets the present of a hearing trumpet, which finally allows her to hear things again because she's been going deaf. And she overhears that her son and his wife are gonna send her to a like care home for old ladies, and that's exactly what happens. And she goes, and it's like a very bizarre place, and it's kind of about Christianity and nuns, and it's ultimately kind of about like apocalypse in a way, and like what the world's gonna look like, and it's very kind of matter of fact, gleefully bizarre, which I think is quite like a Leonora Carrington thing to do, because like I've read like a collection of her short stories, and they all have the same kind of like things are bizarre, but like it's really just everyday bizarrety going on. The book also has some like descriptions of characters, and there's this one black woman specifically who is described in ways that I didn't really like, and so I definitely felt like the book could have been like a lot more sensitive and like, well, just like not not using like racist or like racialized language. Yeah, I think there's also like a particular air to some of the aesthetics that we use that were quite like appropriative, maybe is the word. I'm not entirely sure, and I do think that like it's not just a Leonora Carrington thing, it's also like a that particular time frame thing. I can't remember the words anymore, but yeah. I also read it in order to finish the next book that I finished, which was The Fury Archives, Female Citizenship, Human Rights and the International Avant-Garde by Jill Richards, which is a really interesting book. It covers a lot of ground, and in a way I think that's one of both its strengths and its not strengths. Because in a way I felt like sometimes it was making arguments but without kind of properly finishing those arguments or properly substantiating them. But generally it's a really interesting book about modernism, about kind of like well, I guess no, it starts in the Paris Commune, and then also there's like some revolts in Martinique in the 1870s against French colonialism and slavery and things like that she also touches on. So it's like it starts in the 1870s onwards, but then it kind of quickly goes forward into the 1920s, into war period, and then we get 2 chapters post-war. So yeah, I think some of the ways that it talked about like feminist knowledge and what forms need to be taken into both historical and literary accounts of protest movements, of just like ideologies, of feminist histories. But like it's a very interesting and complicated book, and I definitely am going to be returning to it and like looking through to see what I've underlined. I really did like the section on the afterlives of the female incendiary, which is about the Paris Commune and then also Martinique revolts. And then I also really liked The Art of Not Having Children, Birth Strike, Sabotage and the Reproductive Atlantic. I'm sure I'd have more intelligent thoughts about it at another time, but today is not that day. So the next book I read was Disobedience by Naomi Alderman, which I won't talk about here except for to say that I loved it and I gave it 5 stars. But I won't talk about it here because I made a review of it, which I will link up here, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it, and also if you have any like suggestions for reading that you think is similar to this. The next book I read was, this is upside down, the next book I read was Mistletoe and Murder by Robin Stevens, which is the 5th book in the Murder Most Unladylike series. This one is set over Christmas, and that's kind of also why I was like I should just read it now, because like it would feel even weirder if I like waited even longer since Christmas happened. It was okay to read now, it was a little bit weird, but I also feel like I read something else which was where it was like really hot, and it was not really hot here. This one follows Daisy and Hazel as they go to Cambridge and they stay with Daisy's older brother who's like studying there, and obviously like mystery and murder is afoot. It was also enjoyable. Like I said, I'm enjoying the series. I tend to like be able to guess it, but not like immediately, which is kind of nice. They also do have like quite like intense and somewhat stressful scenarios, but they're not too stressful that it like really stresses me out and makes me feel like scared or upset, which like I think if I was reading like adult murder mysteries I probably would. But then they are also like complicated and nuanced enough to contain like Hazel, who like is the narrator, and she kind of explores her own feelings and talks about like what it means to find a dead body and like how scary that can be, but then also how much she does love being a detective and like being on the case. The only thing that I don't particularly enjoy is like the heterosexuality of the story, where like Hazel has a crush on somebody and like he's in it, and like I just don't care about that. It's not like super a lot, and like I get that it could be nice to be reading that if you were like 14 and you wanted to read about this, or like 12. I don't know how old people are when they read things. The next book I read was The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins, and this I listened to the audiobook of, and I actually listened to it because, or in part because, like it had been on my radar but I hadn't got around to it, but I partially read it because I saw Dee at Heroine's Corner talk about how much she loved it, and I was like, okay, it's available, I'm gonna read it. I think like it's a bit like a sort of post-colonial Sarah Waters novel. It's queer, like it's sapphic, and it explores kind of like, yeah, what being like a queer woman means. But then it also is a lot about, and there's some like hierarchy differences in terms of like class and then also race, and it follows the titular Franny Langton as she writes a kind of memoir, because she's been found asleep in her like mistress's bed with like blood on her hands, and both like the man that she works for and also this woman dead, like in different rooms to her, and so she gets like taken to trial for their murders, and it's kind of like an unravelling of that story. And it is a lot about slavery, because Franny was born on a plantation in Jamaica and was enslaved, and so that's also partially I think why I'd like put it off. I did just about manage to read this, but like I do struggle a lot with, well I guess I do struggle a lot with things about sexual violence which generally, if like a sort of slavery narrative, or if there's like moments of a story which are in with enslaved people, the level of like sexual harm is like really high, because of course that's part of what slavery and the violence of slavery does, is it takes away consent and perpetuate like hideous violence, both sexually and also other types. But yeah, so I do struggle a lot with that, and so I found it quite hard to listen to at times. And there's also stuff about incest which I specifically found really hard. But overall I did enjoy the novel, and it was really nice to read about like a queer black woman in the 1700s. And I guess also the other thing is like there's some stuff about sex work here that I thought was interesting, sex work and power and things like that, and then also like fundamental capitalism, and then also like racial science, which was like a blossoming institution. I think I spoke about it a little bit in another wrap up where I talked about Jane Eyre, because like it's also part of like phrenology, of like the shape of people's faces and what that means, and then also how like that's part of like a racial domination, and there was a lot of like disgusting experimentation on enslaved people, and yeah, but anyway, so yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's a very violent story, but then it does also have a lot of love in it too. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think like it's nice that it's queer. Yeah, but I think like you should read it, but only if you're prepared to listen to, or I guess you could skip some parts. Like I did find myself like trying not to listen to parts of it on purpose. So the next book I read is The Three Revel Sisters by Marie-Louise Gagné, which is translated from the French by Anna Aitken and Polly McIntosh, and it actually contains two stories. One is called Three Revel Sisters, of the title, and then the other is An Atonement. And actually it's funny because like reading this after Confessions of Franny Langton, An Atonement also has like some similar vibes, in the sense of like these like rich women taking too much laudanum and murder going on. But yeah, I actually did enjoy it. I definitely enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the other translated book in this like Revolutionary Women Gallic Editions series. And Three Revel Sisters is basically about these three sisters who have a suitor come to visit them in the place where they live, and he is an arsehole, and he like specifically on purpose pits them against each other, and like one of them is especially desperate to marry because she's 25. Lol. It's just about like what happens, and it's a pretty tragic tale. What I thought was most interesting about it was like how it told the story, which is something I'm really interested in, and I think is part of like feminist novel writing, queer novel writing, and also like modernist. And then the last book to talk about is Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Harman, which is a book that I have spoken about on multiple occasions and I have finally finished, and I am really glad actually that I took such a long time to read it, or at least for me such a long time to read it. Because I feel like it's a book that you need to kind of stay with and really like think through and reflect on. It's about, I guess it's sort of, it's from like the 18, I guess I want to say like 70s, but it might be just like 1890s onwards, up to like 1929 basically. A kind of like history of these like black women, black radicals, commies, queers, chorus girls of the time period. And it is this history book about those groups, and about more than just those groups, and about work, and about displacement and violence. And I think, you know, another reason why it took me a long time to read is because like are very much about violence, and especially like sexual violence, and that's very difficult. And then there's also a lot about incarceration. And in fact I feel like this is actually a book that could be almost like a better and like a blacker version of Wanderlust by Rebecca Solnit, which I reviewed last year, because of the way that it talks about how public life of black people, and specifically focusing on black women but also generally, was so criminalized. You know, like walking the street was like a dangerous thing to do, and you know how that then shapes like the history of walking, the history of the street, of being able to exist, of resistance. So in a way it felt like a kind of non-fiction version of like free indirect discourse, where like you get the narrative and it's still like in third person, but the narrative like takes on a character's thoughts about like something. So like Jane Austen is supposed to have like developed that narrative strategy, but yeah, so it's like a non-fiction version of that. It's almost like a seance as well, like the voices of these beautiful women, these beautiful experiments, these beautiful queers who created beauty and life and love together in the face of violence and just so much harm. Yeah, it's almost like a seance of them and their voices, and they come through. And it's not told in like a traditional kind of history textbook format, so I feel like maybe some people would really dislike that, but I thought, you know, I think it's like a really important part of telling the story, because it's about like personalizing history in a way, and also demonstrating like its lack of objectivity at the same time as like showing the like raucous loudness of all of these voices that people now try to suppress, and obviously were suppressing at the time too. It's an incredible just an incredible book, and I definitely felt as well like reading this after having read and loved Loat, there was a lot of kind of threads that connected the two together, especially around like communal luxury and like the desire and the expression of beauty by black people, and black women especially, is like a really radical thing, and how it transforms like access to this type of beauty, and it kind of deconstructs the exploitation that normally creates beauty. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's just like a really beautiful like mosaic of black history. So I definitely recommend it. I guess I would recommend like going as slowly as you need to, because it's just worth it. Like, and I definitely felt the Fury Archives and Wayward Lives Beautiful Experiments have similar kind of methodologies and ways, which is also kind of interesting to have been reading them at the same time, because they both look to archives of like the prison, so like arrest records, and like even like sociologist notes, and things that are often kind of not included or used in only very specific ways to tell histories. And yeah, I think that's really valuable, and like working through and like pushing at the edges of, in order to hear the real story and not just the report or the psychologist. I think that's everything I wanted to say. I'm sure this is a very long video. I've not done very much more of my bag, like, because I'm just going around and around these bits to make them thicker. I've done a bit, and you know, that's good, and hopefully it worked for you to see some of it. Yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you agree with what I'm saying about them, or if you want to read them. I will see you when I next see you, and I will hopefully see you in a way that feels a bit less uncomfortable than it does now. Bye!